Okay. So I should not be here
So,
until it's
we
my
have
time.
Yeah, I guess
Okay.
you're right. Sorry about that, but.
No, no worries.
Typically, we don't have public comment, but, so, you know.
the floor here. Separation, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we both went to the same college at the same time, believe it or not, yeah. University of Massachusetts over on the East Coast. So, funny enough, I was in a fraternity and his band used to play at our fraternity. And so, I had seen him before, but I wasn't, close friends with him or anything. But then I was walking in my neighborhood and I saw him wearing a UMass shirt and I was like, hey, did you go to UMass? And since then we've hung out a few times, him and his wife, very nice people. Yeah, for vegan cooking. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Here, I'll see if I can get it. It might just not be on.
Yeah, no, he's doing good work on it. That's great for him. Yeah, that's awesome. He sent me, because, I'm bad with the technology, I guess. He sent me screenshots of when the Bike Vancouver meetings are coming out, so I think I'll be able to make one this Tuesday. Hi, I'm Travis. At the meeting. Oh, cool. That'll be a great one to head to then.
Testing.
Nice. Excellent. Absolutely. Did you get a chance to look over the data so far? On the, yeah. Yes, and if you look, when it says the biggest priorities are still that it's easier to find users. And I think that speaks to that there's things that we can do without increasing supply that allow kind of define. Otherwise, it's only for sure, because that's what I took away from it for the most part. Trust me when I say there's a lot of projects. We don't like. Yeah, I would agree based on this data and based on my discussion. How we doing? Good. Good to see you. I don't think we've ever met in person. No, Ryan Morin. Ryan Curtin. Yeah. Used to come to council chambers all the time. Now it's not so much. You only come when it's here. No, this land use hearing is just my career. Yeah.
Testing, can you hear me? Testing. Okay. Can the folks on Teams hear me? Dan?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Okay. We're good. All righty. We'd like to call this meeting of the Parking Advisory Committee to order. Thanks for everybody for coming on such a beautiful morning. We finally have some nice temperate weather, I feel like, in the morning compared to what we've had. So we'll get our roll call going. Tina, can you help us with that?
Sure. Travis Jump.
Present.
Ryan Morin.
Here. Present.
Derek Ginter. Not here. Doug Varenas is excused. Jason Cromer.
Here.
Kurt Stonix. Jocelyn Cross. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Excellent. Next up, we'll have our public comment period. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak during this meeting? And so, Gabriel, is there a certain order that we go in, or do we just have people stand up? Can you help us out with that?
Yeah, the gentleman in front, feel free to come up first.
Garrett, we took roll call, so Garrett just arrived. Thank you.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning. My name is Devin Williams. I'm a resident of the waterfront down here. So, like you said, beautiful walk today over to the City Hall building. And I wanted to stop in and just have a couple insights. I've been in and around Vancouver since 2018, and majority of the time living downtown, before over near Mill Plain, over kind of in the intersection between downtown and uptown, and now at the waterfront. And I just wanted to make sure that as we continue to grow as a city, as I'm sure everybody up here knows that Vancouver is rapidly growing, that when we think about parking, that we're really considering how that affects the overall growth of the area. Specifically, our downtown areas, our most valuable properties. I don't know how much of a value we should be putting on new spots introduced outside of what we already have, especially with the new garage coming in, and the fact that most of the new developments already have on-site parking for their residents and their workers and stakeholders. So when we look at that, I think the priority should be adapting the additional or the spaces that we have right now, how to better effectively use those, how to better effectively get people to utilize them, especially during the day. I work from home and have a chance to walk around downtown during my lunch breaks and see how much parking is really being utilized, especially daytime hours versus evening hours. As we know, the waterfront fills up in the evening, while the rest of downtown lays pretty empty for the most part. So how can we better utilize those spaces? How can we better introduce alternatives to parking? Because induced demand is a real thing. The more parking is available, people are just going to take that, but people are resilient. I think we all know that. If we go downtown to Portland during a Timbers game, there's no on-site parking, but people find alternatives to get there. So the last thing I just wanted to say is I think we should prioritize keeping our main urban spaces pedestrianized that we can. Right now, I think that the idea that Waterfront Way between Grant Street and Esther Street, the fact that that's not completely pedestrianized for as few parking spots that it actually accommodates is a huge miss, especially in an area that is readily, especially in the summertime, completely filled up with people standing on the sidewalk, standing in the park, coming in and out of the streets. There's no reason that space can be better adapted, especially with more spots coming in via the garage, via every other development that's coming. So just wanted to keep that as priority for the committee.
Excellent. Thank you. And it looks like we have another. If you can come up front.
Good morning. Hello, my name is Tabor Kelly. I live in the South Cliff neighborhood. Lived around Vancouver for a while. I just wanted to come here to say that the government needs to provide services that individuals in the private sector cannot reasonably be expected to provide for themselves. A really good example would be the street, because no one entity could own the street without holding a natural monopoly on it. But parking is not one of those services. As evidenced by all of the surface lots in downtown, the private sector is entirely capable of providing parking. And the city should only provide on-street parking when it improves the streetscape. I would add that parking is not a destination, and there are many ways to get in and out of downtown without parking your private automobile while you're not using it. Finally, I'd add that parking should be priced in real time so that anyone who is willing to pay for it can reasonably find parking. but I don't think there should be any discount for living in the neighborhood or having a shorter or longer stay. Every hour that I monopolize a parking space on public property is an hour that someone else can't use it. It doesn't matter if it was the first hour or the 7th hour. And so you should just charge me whatever that hour, can sell for with a floating rate. Anyway, that's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to say that Jocelyn Cross arrived about 4 or 5 minutes ago. Thank you. Okay, we have, Brian, we have 4 people online that have their hands raised, so we would
Perfect.
like to give
So
public notice.
will you go ahead and administer
Yes.
those one after the other? And will you
you.
keep time on that as well?
Yes. thank
Okay, thank you, Tina.
Hi, Alyssa. Alyssa, are you there? Would you like to give
Yeah.
public testimony? Thank you.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Alyssa. I live in the Esther Short neighborhood, so right across the street from Esther Short. And I'm here to advocate for the city reducing and ideally eventually eliminating public parking downtown. The first thing I want to say is that I want to be clear about what we're talking about when we say public parking. And what we're really talking about is free or heavily subsidized storage of people's private property on one of our most valuable assets, which is our land. So just conceptually, I don't really think that giving people options to store their private property, often at a very hefty discount, on one of our most valuable assets really makes a ton of sense. But I want to talk about more than just concepts. I also want to talk about specifically public parking here in downtown Vancouver. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the discrepancy between perception and reality when it comes to parking here in downtown. So when we look at the results of the parking study, we can see that outside of one notable neighborhood, the waterfront, our public parking is heavily underutilized, and we have a massive oversupply of it, given that 50 to 60% of it's being utilized on weekdays and on weekends. But when we look at the survey results, we can see that most people said that they wanted more parking, and especially more parking for visiting businesses and not for the residents of the neighborhood. So really what I think people are saying when they say that they want more parking is they want to be able to park as close as they possibly can to their destinations with minimal walking here in downtown. And given that we have so many other things that we could prioritize with that land, I don't think prioritizing minimizing walking for most people to their destination in such a pleasant urban environment as downtown makes sense as our #1 priority here. So the other thing that I want to talk about is that when we see that a lot of people said that they wanted to prioritize parking to access businesses and not for residents, that makes me think that a lot of them probably don't live downtown and so probably aren't subject to a lot of the negative effects that come from having all of these access parking. Negative effects meaning all of the negative effects from the increased traffic that this generates. That being increased noise pollution, increased air pollution, both from tire particulates and tailpipe emissions, and also just the decrease in safety that you have when you're, a pedestrian out walking in downtown trying to exist around all of these cars. So I think that the data doesn't support that we need as much parking as we have, and we have so many other things that we could prioritize with the land that we have, like providing alternative multimodal infrastructure to make it easier to get downtown and not have to utilize parking, outdoor dining, and even on some of the parking lots, prioritizing things like housing and storage, housing for people and not for cars. So I think that if we want to have this help the city meet its climate goals and make our most economically productive part of the city, downtown, more vibrant and more enjoyable place to be, we should be prioritizing reducing public parking downtown. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. We can go to Israel. Israel, would you like to speak and give public testimony?
Yes. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, my name is Israel Lopez. I wanted to share some comments about parking in downtown Vancouver. Number one, I think we have plenty. Even with the farmers market bringing people to Esther Short Park, there seems to be a lot of available parking spots available just only a few blocks away from the action. Two, as weird as it sounds, people can walk. I felt that quite a bit myself. I'm a transplant here to the area. I lived in a very car-centric Southern California, and I didn't realize how allergic to walking I was until moving here. At first, it felt like pulling teeth, but after a while, walking a block or two after parking is no big deal. It's okay to not park right in front of the business. or location I'm visiting. 3, more and more people are going car-free. This year, I sent my car to the junkyard, and I didn't want to deal with the expense of repair, insurance, and gas. We still have one car, but we'll likely drop that if gas prices skyrocket or insurance costs go up further from here. 4, bike parking. We need more of it. I will ride with a bike trailer, and sometimes I need to visit a downtown business, and the bike parking for standard bikes won't fit an additional 4-foot trailer. I'd like to pay for parking. There just doesn't seem to be a way to do that today. Those are all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Zach, would you like to give public testimony? Zach?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Zach. I live in the Van Mall neighborhood here in Vancouver and I have since 2020. And I guess I just want to comment today on, I think we have a huge surplus of parking in the downtown area. Other commenters have already kind of hit the points that I was going to anyways, but if you're willing to walk even just a block or two away, even at the busiest times, farmers market or other events happening in the downtown area, parking is easy to find. And quite frankly, I think it's too cheap. And I think we are in effect cannibalizing the efforts that we're making with transit and other modes of transportation to our downtown area. When you can park as cheaply as you can in many of the desirable parts of probably the best parts of our city, at least for urbanism and restaurants and places to visit, it's cheaper than riding the bus. That's an issue. I take the bus in often. I live right off the Greenvine. Otherwise, I bike into the downtown area. And I just think with the climate action goals that our city has set out, the priority should be how are we going to get people to mode shift? And I think it's going to probably frustrate some of our residents, and I can understand that, but I think you're going to have to make it less desirable to drive into the downtown area to get people to not drive into the downtown area. You have to make taking the bus more attractive. You have to make walking to kind of switch their mindset of, oh, I should just be able to drive into wherever it is in downtown Vancouver. I think the first speaker hit it on the head. I go to Timbers games fairly frequently, and we bike to those because driving a car there is just not realistic, and nor should it be. And it makes the entire game day experience that much better. We should be using a similar mindset when we're approaching our downtown. Thanks.
Thank you, Zach. Valerie, would you like to give public testimony? Valerie? I see you have your hand up. Are you there? Okay, Scott. Scott, would you like to give public testimony?
Yes, thank you for your time. Scott, I live in the downtown area. I largely walk and bike around downtown. And just to echo a lot of what's been said, for me, one of my largest priorities is the climate action goals of the city, is in addition to the safety goals. And I think we can't get sidetracked by one of the primary priorities, which should be decreasing vehicle miles traveled in order to have any chance of meeting those goals and doing what I think is making responsible decisions for the future of the city. Adding additional parking to increase convenience is simply contrary to all of those goals. So it's not just about making transit better, it's about disincentivizing vehicle trips, personal vehicle trips. The study clearly shows we have an abundance of parking available, and even at the waterfront, alternative modes should be prioritized and vehicle trips should be disincentivized. So I would just keep that in mind, and I would argue that we should keep the focus on those climate goals. Thank you.
Okay, here we go. We're back on. Valerie, I'd like to check in with you again. Okay, well, that's it for public comment.
Excellent. Thanks for all that provided comment. It is truly appreciated. Next on our agenda is the motion to approve the May 8th, 2024 meeting minutes. Does anyone put forward that motion?
I move to approve the meeting minutes from our last meeting.
Excellent. Do we need a second, or do we need a second on that?
I second that motion.
Excellent. We'll do a verbal vote. All those in favor of approving the May 8th meeting, say aye. Aye. Fair enough. All right. Anyone for nay? All righty. The meeting minutes have thus been approved. Moving down, number 4, parking plan and vision principles discussion. Gabriel, do you want to help us out with that?
Yes. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you for everybody who gave public comment. Parking and the parking plan and transportation is a hot button topic, and I really do appreciate all of the comments and the engagement with this topic. So thank you so much for those that gave comment. Today, we are going to dive into some topics, quite a few, actually. We're going to give an update on existing conditions and a few other parking plan-related topics. So I will set that up. I am joined by Ben Weber from Walker Consultants. I know you guys are probably familiar with him by now. Next slide, please. So today in our presentation, we will go over study updates. We will talk a little bit about our public outreach efforts. We will also talk about our parking occupancy data that we've collected over the last year or so. We will also talk about some parking principles. We will also go into some upcoming steps as it relates to the parking plan and implementation. We will also talk about some strategy, in particular, some strategies that relate to the PAC core topics within your charter, and we will also dive into some topics that are outside of your charter. Next slide, please. We do ask that you keep front of mind a couple of questions that we will discuss at the end, but I kind of want to present them up front so you guys can think about them ahead of time as Ben presents and lays out some of the data and topics. So first is, what are your thoughts about the strategies outlined? Do you support, reject, have questions, or would like to modify any of the strategies outlined? And second, the plan document. What strategies and details are must-haves in your mind? So I would like for you guys to keep that front of mind. And again, as we go through these topics, please jot down any notes or questions that come from each of those. Next slide. So a little bit of just a reminder around the study plan and objectives. Just want to lay out as a reminder that this plan is developed this plan is to help support growth and urbanization without adding parking supply. Again, we're not looking to reduce, but we are looking to be more efficient with our parking supply. Secondly, we want to encourage shared private parking to promote more efficient supply use. Again, Ben will dive into the data here, and you'll see that there's a lot of opportunity out there with regard to parking supply. Also, we want to align parking and mobility practices to support the city's effort towards climate action, reduce transportation emissions, equity. We want to add to affordable housing, make urban lands more developable, reduce transportation costs overall. And lastly, we want to offer best practices for parking management to fulfill the city's objectives for parking and right-of-way assets. Next slide. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it along to Ben to dive into the nuts and bolts of this. And so take it away, Ben.
All right. Is that on?
Great, there we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Weber. This is my third time with you all, but the first time in person. So I'm glad to finally meet you all face to face. And thank you for spending 30 extra minutes with us today, extending your meeting. We have a lot to get through here, so I think we're going to definitely fill the remaining 70 minutes here as we really dive into kind of the guts of strategies through this downtown study and parking plan. So we'll kind of get into it here. This is a fairly extensive and detail-laden deck. I won't elaborate on everything, but hopefully it's a nice keepsake for you all to kind of come back to as a reminder of the topics we're discussing today. And we've really used this deck to start building out some of the details and frameworks for all of these strategies. So I'll give kind of an overview, of past efforts of the project here, but then really get into, strategy conversations with you all. I'll try to tee those up, and then I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts about the viability and practicality of them in the Vancouver downtown environment. So to kind of get rolling here, we just wanted to kind of give, a quick summary of past activities that have been underway. As you know, our survey one closed in early June, and so we have results that we've pulled out from that. We'll have a complete summary memo of this in a few weeks that you'll be able to review. But just to give kind of a quick look at it, we had over 2,500 responses, which I think is a really solid response rate for a parking plan, really any plan for that matter. And then just looking at some of the demographics here, 13.6% of those respondents live downtown and 30% work downtown. And then we wanted to just kind of identify, 27% of people have those 1 to 2 hour stays and 41% 2 to 4 hours. So it's kind of an interesting cross-section or a self-estimated cross-section of people's duration for their downtown visits. That's going to help inform, some of the parking management tactics that we look at later on and matching that to the duration people are typically down here. But as we noticed and as some community members have pointed out, there's requests and interest in more supply, more convenient supply, lower priced parking. That is a fairly typical response in every community I work in. And so that is, maybe a mindset or attitude in community members that you'll want to be aware of, city councilors will want to be aware of as they're considering some of these strategies. And knowing that some of these strategies are considering significant overhauls to kind of the business as usual approach. It's kind of indicative here, when asked this question, agree or disagree, parking should cost more when demand for parking is high. We've got a pretty high disagree or strongly disagree rate here. It's no surprise that those answers come through, but just a little bit of a mindset here. So let's see if this clicker works. There we go. Okay. Again, I won't get into too much detail here, but people are interested when we're talking about priorities for downtown Vancouver transportation in making parking easier to find, and then sort of more specifically, making it easier for people who visit downtown to shop, visit businesses, dine, and recreate to park. The default or the maybe the traditional approach to that would be to supply more parking in gross terms, but the entire intention or a major intention of this plan is to kind of rethink that assumption that you need more supply and instead look at supply efficiency, and improved management techniques to take advantage of, the legitimate oversupply you have in downtown today, make that more available and more usable to people who need it, but to try to make driving and parking less impactful in your downtown environment overall. So it's kind of threading a needle of, people's interests versus maybe the position they put out in a survey like this. And then, along the same lines, please choose the top 3 uses you'd like to prioritize for the street curbside, vehicle parking rising to the top here, That's what people are accustomed to in cities across the country and certainly Vancouver. But you also have parklets, you have bike lanes, bus stops, gardens, landscape areas, curb extensions that Vancouver has started to develop and really kind of lean into. And you see from these community results, some awareness and some interest in those kind of alternative curb uses. So that's something we'll be kind of exploring and delving into in the curb management plan sort of element of this whole work. A few more details here. We did just about a month ago, a couple small group discussions, 3 of these, one with the disability community, another with hospitality and visitor stakeholders, a lot of hotel operators and restaurateurs, and then the Downtown Stakeholder Forum, which is that monthly forum the city holds. There's a couple highlights here. There was generally support for supporting other modes of travel. I think particularly under the guise of driving not being possible for many people. That's something we heard particularly out of the disability community meeting. An interesting note, kind of really about the details mattering in this realm. Someone pointed out to us that some of the pay station screens are too high to read from a wheelchair. That's not something I had ever thought about, but it's really important to the usability of the system. Being able to make that transaction. And then I think we want to take that mindset of, how do people understand your parking operations and your curb operations and engage with it? And kind of extrapolate that lesson out to everything from wayfinding to payment to working with your enforcement officers and your citation system. Some of the business owners definitely consider nearby employee parking to be a must-have. It's a pretty common thing to hear. But we also heard a lot of interest in, meeting more nuanced curb uses and evolving curb uses for dining and bikes, loading zones. And I think all 3 groups kind of really remarked on, the parking issues that arise during events and kind of surge periods. That's when the system gets maybe a little bit more stressed in certain instances. And that's where all these management tools really need to work together in harmony to create kind of an effective program. So that's sort of something to keep in mind here is like those peak events that you have in your parking and your curb demands. If we can help solve and manage for some of those instances, a lot of those same tools will be meaningful on a typical day, sort of quote unquote typical day. So then on to, and of course, feel free to pause, ask me any questions along the way here. I'm kind of plowing through some of this background information. So we've been doing these occupancy analyses. On-street information has been collected by Gabe and Ann on the parking services team. And just looking at January through March of this year, Wednesdays at 62% average occupancy in the downtown zone, Saturdays at 61%, and then Sundays at 51% average occupancy. But of course, there's hot spots and cold spots in this. The waterfront in particular is often exceeding 80%, sometimes even exceeding 90%, really getting kind of functionally congested. But I think that kind of the top line numbers, yeah.
Was that like 9 to 5?
Yeah, it was done different times of the day. Typically, we would try to do 2 counts a day, one in the morning before 11 a.m. and then another count in between 4 and 6, depending on labor. But it did vary, and it was typically between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m.
Yeah, no, good question. Yeah, we have had questions about what does it look like at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. We don't have that data right now, but it may be something the city, considers collecting in the future. And then off-street occupancy, our team was out there for a couple days in April, delightful days, kind of like this, counting spaces at over 220 lots, over 8,000 spaces. We kind of have a series of maps and whatnot here that you'll be able to see in a detailed existing conditions report in a few weeks. But just to kind of pull some top line numbers out here, very few of the lots exceeded 75% use at any point that we counted them. And the map here at right, green is under 50%, yellow is 50 to 75, orange is 75 to 85, and then red is 85% or more. And, those 85% or more lots are where, it starts to perk our ears up of it's kind of functionally full. So there's very few spaces that, really meet that or that full at any point, to say nothing of consistently. Thursday, across our whole count period, which was roughly 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., we were showing 49 to 54% utilization. And then Saturday, that really dropped down to 25 to 29% utilization. So a big weekend drop off in the on-street, especially compared to the big weekend drop off in the off-street, especially compared to the on-street that was a bit steadier in its use on the weekends. But again, sort of the top line there, you're no more than about half full downtown wide. But again, a lot of hot spots there, particularly the waterfront. And then, parts of Uptown occasionally had spikes. And then what's called sort of the Southeast District, everything kind of east of Columbia, kind of south or around the Evergreen area, sort of your central business district. Those were showing, 60, 70% full sometimes. A couple other maps here just to show you different time periods. On the left is that Thursday afternoon from 3 to 5. So a big distribution of green, under 50% there. And then 1 to 3 p.m. on the Saturday, kind of the same story, but you can see that areas around the waterfront and then parking lots that serve the farmers market that was happening then are also busier. So it's pretty understandable. So just as you kind of digest those top line numbers, I ask you to think about for the next hour, knowing all of that about parking supply and kind of the oversupply that downtown has, what does that make you think about the management tools that would work for typical days and surge days? And then what do you think about the potential or the implications of this oversupply, for making efforts to reduce the public parking supply, to develop off-street lots into projects, housing businesses, turning that over into vertical development, and then the ability of downtown to respond to parking requirement reductions. This project isn't looking at the development code parking requirements, but we know the city is exploring that right now through kind of a different path or a parallel path. And what we discover through this project, not just about occupancy, but about new management tools, is definitely going to have implications for, if you change your private parking requirements and, potentially create more on-street demand. What kind of management tools would you need in those instances? So quickly into parking principles. Back when we last talked on May 8th, we spent that hour sort of delving into the strategies, but then also the principles for parking management that the city has had in place since 2006. And that this project is tasked with helping to at least audit, if not fully reform. So we got, your input on that and kind of have been distilling it. And just wanted to reflect, the emphasis you all put on explicitly positioning parking as one of many modes of travel, or I guess the end result of driving as one of many modes of travel. The recognition of driving and parking as a useful tool for many people, really almost everyone at some point. but also often detrimental to sustainability and urban livability efforts and some of the bigger picture goals Vancouver has in mind. The need for clear principles to guide operations and management, and those principles to just inform the strategies we're going to dive into here in a minute. Understanding there's a growing kind of body of users of downtown, you know, the parking and the curb assets for businesses and recreation and access to housing and whatnot. And so to really take a broad mindset and kind of put ourselves in the shoes of a wide variety of users of the curb to test out, you know, what are the implications of these strategies if they get launched? And I think each and every one of you kind of questioned, you know, what is highest quality of the parking product? That probably meant something very different in 2006 than it does here 18 years later. And so kind of trying to recast that to think about improving usability, encouraging a park once attitude, and then replacing this default assumption that more parking supply is needed. And I think we've heard from a lot of community members this morning. They are starting to question that, or really forcefully pushing back against that assumption. You know, not to I'll go through these kind of quickly here. So taking that input you had from May, we're trying to translate that into kind of an informal list of fresh approaches. It's kind of a mindset right now to think through these strategies. You know, so to reduce driving and make for a healthier downtown, what can you do to reduce the parking supply, make parking less prominent and impactful, and use pricing to shape demand? How do you create more flexible people-serving uses of the curb? Commit to that mindset that places, homes, businesses, and people activities are the destination. Parking is not the destination. It's just the end result of driving one mobility tool. And then really any parking and curb access should have a clear and valuable purpose, you know, from freight deliveries to access for disabled people. And I think this is an important one to keep in mind when you look at the range of time limits or pricing options out there or parking permits that exist. Do you have any bloat in your system that you'd want to kind of cut back on because it's not serving a useful purpose anymore? And then kind of finally, really sticking to your values. You know, as you seek to make the curb supply more widely available to users, have a very clear reason for permits and reservations and any exceptions to the rules and special uses. Tap into your underused supply and avoid building new. Use pricing. One idea here really is about having people pay for parking per use, as opposed to using things like monthly permits, which basically creates an all-you-can-eat or all-you-can-park buffet of parking. You know, once you spend that money, it doesn't cost you a penny to park the next time. So it's one of those really demand-driving tools you can use. I encourage you to simplify your supply, like reducing the confusion of granular regulations, and then simplifying your transactions. You know, make sure your pricing is logical, that it's easy to pay, and that those regulations are clear and feel fair to the user. And then kind of reaffirming what enforcement is for. You know, is it to generate revenue? Yeah, well, yes, you know, parking services needs to generate revenue to operate, you know, to be a self-sustaining enterprise fund. So then probably more importantly is really to promote compliance and harmonized behavior in kind of the messy parking and curb use world. Okay, so getting into sort of gathering your input on these strategies, we're going to go through sort of 5 key topic areas, looking at geographic and time-based pricing, considering weekend payment, reforming permit options, you know, wayfinding and the user experience, and then parking sharing across public and private partners and suppliers. Before we kind of dive into the nitty-gritty, though, just any questions on the background or any reflections on the principles from a few weeks or a few months ago? Okay, let's roll our sleeves up here. Oh, yeah, Kurt.
It seems, at least from the data and what we heard today, that people that live down here don't want more parking. People that visit here want more parking.
Mm-hmm.
Family businesses, are my experience with our businesses, is our employees want parking.
Yeah.
If they don't have parking, they go get jobs. Just a few comments.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, those broad strokes are really important. And, you know, most of those survey results were from non-downtown residents. But yeah, as we dug into, you know, downtown, people who live downtown, there's less driving behavior with them to begin with. So, yeah, that's a good summary. All right. So the first thing we want to look at here is kind of called core and edge rates. And this is geographic demand balancing. It's a tool to help balance those uneven demands, those hot spots and those cold spots. And you already do this a little bit with the higher on-street pricing that you just started in the waterfront, for example. But it's kind of been an ad hoc process to get there. And so this would be really about the city sort of more formally establishing, say, a core zone and an edge zone, and thinking about different pricing strategies in each of those locations, sort of under the premise that the core is a busier, higher demand parking location. And it's a location where you really want to encourage higher turnover of use, you know, 1 and 2 and 3 hour stays. Whereas on the edge, you might be more tolerant or even supportive of, you know, day-long parking. So really, this is kind of taking what you already do a little bit and kind of committing to it not just operationally, but sort of branding, you know, the parking asset, making it clear to the users that there is maybe a more expensive core zone and a less expensive edge zone. Maybe some of your permits are only applicable in the edge, for example. And then also kind of includes the city committing to regularly, at some interval, looking at that occupancy data, looking at revenue, and saying, do we need to adjust these boundaries? Do we need to change rates? It really gives you a geographic framework, you know, for understanding how do you use kind of the designation of different zones and matching pricing to kind of meet the market demand, you know, for using the on-street curb in particular, but this could of course apply to, you know, your couple off-street lots as well. Make sure this is the only slide on this topic. It is, yeah. So I mean, core and edge rates, that's the quick and dirty on it. Do any of you have kind of initial thoughts on formalizing this approach? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll also show you one other pricing thing here as our next topic that might bring a little more clarity to it all. But I think, yes, the general premise is price it so that short-term, high-turnover users, you know, are using the core. That's customers and people visiting restaurants, you know, people who are perhaps a little bit more tolerant of that higher hourly rate. And then setting the edge at a lower cost and maybe having time limits that are longer there for that employee parking. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's probably, well, let me show this tier and progressive pricing thing, which is the next topic, because that's going to kind of work in tandem with this. And then we can revisit your question here. So the complement to this, whereas core and edge is geographic based, now I want to introduce a time-based payment option. And this is called progressive or tier pricing. And what this does is potentially actually kind of gets rid of time limits in some instances. Like the 2-hour time limit, 4-hour time limit might go away, but you're actually gradually increasing the per hour parking cost as the day goes on. You know, so your first hour might be $2, your second hour might be $2, but then your third and fourth hour might bump up to $2.50 or $3. Your 8th hour might be $4 an hour. And so it provides the option, you know, because you can park there for 10 hours a day, you know, to use that curb all day. But it's saying, you know, you do have to pay for it. And often you would apply this like in a core zone and price it such that, you know, it's $2 or $3 an hour for those first couple hours. And if someone really, really, really needs to use the core for 8 or 10 hours a day, they can. There's no time limit stopping them. You know, but that price in those final couple hours is going to be higher because it's really in the city's interest to have that be a high turnover space. And so you do just want to charge more for people who choose to stay there all day. And it works well when you have like an edge zone that might not be using progressive pricing and just has more of a flat rate kind of day-long price to it. So it's a broader range of options, but really kind of trying to do away with time limits and the complexity of enforcing time limits and just using kind of pricing as the signal for people to move on. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it works really well with apps in the sense that oftentimes you just have your credit card in the app and you don't really pay until you leave. And so you don't necessarily have to prepay or guess how many hours you're going to stay at the curb. You certainly can, but it gives you the flexibility to kind of pay after the fact. But then you can also make those payments at the meter and, you know, a pay station and prepay for 2 hours or 6 hours. Yeah.
So is that tied to a specific spot or like a zone? So if I'm in zone 100, right, I move my car after 2 hours, am I paying $2 again, or am I still paying $3 or whatever the increase is?
If you move your car, or?
Yeah. Like Parking Kitty, right?
Yeah.
In a zone. So if I'm in a specific zone, right, I'm still good, even if I pay 2 hours. If I move my car to another part of the zone, I'm still okay, right? Is that how that would?
You can do it either way. I've got the Sacramento example up here, and they do it like you're describing, where any 2+ hour curb, you can move from space to space, and it's still just one transaction, basically. But you could be kind of more strict and start the clock over again every time you move.
And I'll add that, you know, you're right with Parking Kitty, it is based off zone, but you know, and we're still working out the details, but I guess our thought would be that kind of to the core and edge philosophy, where if you're within the core, we would still want to count that towards staying within the core, right? We want to encourage the park once philosophy, right? So we would prefer you not to move your car from block to block, especially to avoid time limits. And Jocelyn, to address your question before around employee parking, I do think to the comment before around, the private supply, in particular, like the garage that's coming on the waterfront, we fully expect that will offer some solutions for long-term parking, right? I don't think it is necessarily a good solution to have an employee parked on the curb for 8 hours a day for some of these businesses, right? Depending on the business, possibly. But that's also why we are pursuing public-private partnerships as well, right? Potentially tapping into some of the supply that is available now, that is underutilized, that can maybe, help with some of the long-term parking without putting an additional burden on the short-term on-street parking.
I would say with the core and edge, one of the thoughts that I have is it does seem to potentially increase efficiency in the parking stock that we have to really make it simplistic. If we had two spots, one a 10-minute walk away and one right in front of a business, the employee parking right in front of that business is only doing that one time, right? And so they're going to do that one time, whereas the spot that maybe for customers of the business would turn over 3 times during that 8-hour period. And so it makes more sense for that employee to walk the 10 minutes one time than the customers, 3 separate sets of customers to walk, 10 minutes each time. So I do, just preliminary based on my understanding of it, do think it can help with efficiency in that way.
No, that's kind of exactly the intention with core and edge pricing, and then, having this progressive tier overlay that maybe you would just use in the core zone, to provide that flexibility, but tie it, promote turnover and compel people to pay for those longer term stays. So very crude graphic of that here. Jason, did you have your hand?
Yeah, I do have a question. For the core and edge pricing, how flexible, I guess the system that we would use, or if we were to build it internally, whichever, how flexible are changes in those prices? For example, surge pricing. If we expect some event in the core, let's say Main Street shut down for a festival, can we adapt those core prices and increase them for surge, or do dynamic pricing within the core and edge? I guess my question is on flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, all the technology exists to do surge pricing this day and age. You can do it down to the minute if you want. I think there's some limitations in your city code right now about, how you can implement that. And we haven't really dug into, would you want to do event-based surge pricing or not? But if that's a topic you all want to dig into, we could spend a few minutes on it right now.
And I'll add a little bit to that. Actually, it came up in our one of our small group conversations with the hospitality and tourism group. To Ben's point, there is technology out there that makes it easier. However, operationally, it can be difficult, right? To change pricing in the moment, you really have to capture accurate data, which is a very difficult task to do. We are working towards gathering those tools. But then also with event-based pricing, right? We think about, you certainly can execute it. You have to have a lot of planning. You got to understand, the time of the event, the estimated population, et cetera. But then we also got to think about the type of events that we have in downtown, in particular, our most popular, right, which is the waterfront, which is the farmers market. And folks come and go, right? There isn't a set time that everybody's coming, like maybe a concert or something, right? So the type of events are also create another operational hurdle, but it is something that we are working towards in terms of getting tools that will better allow us to manage that. It's just not as easy as one would think.
So what did the hospitality industry think about surge pricing? I would guess they'd say, don't make our customers have to pay more to come down here.
They certainly had some questions and some points of contention, but I essentially said the same thing, right? That the events are sometimes need to be managed in terms of congestion, right? In terms of making it easier for folks to get to their business. If we have a large event and there's a bunch of congestion, it may discourage folks from from coming downtown, right, and coming to their business. And so if we can help to mitigate that in other ways, then I think that that was something that they really, they liked, but they also did bring up your point of, you know, let's not make it harder on our businesses.
Well, and I was just thinking affordability. I mean, we talk about equity now. It's like people that don't make a lot of money. It's like, I can't go to that event because I can't afford the parking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
All that.
yeah.
Very complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's a tactic that's floating out there. There aren't that many communities that really surge up in a super responsive way. You know, San Francisco kind of does it as a demand management tool, not so much tied to events, but just tracking demand. So it's kind of a tool we could describe in this plan, but really defer making a recommendation about it. It's probably not something that Vancouver needs in the immediate or immediate term. I mean, it was interesting that the hospitality folks brought it up. Like, they kind of do surge pricing. I mean, that's why happy hour exists. Yeah. I guess it's the opposite of surge pricing, but reducing, you know, 4 o'clock, the beer is cheaper. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, you know, when we look at the first question on this, parking should cost more when demand for parking is high. I can understand why the vast majority disagree with that, because it's sort of phrased in a negative way. You're just talking about demand for parking is high. Well, I'm stressed out. Demand for parking is high, and I got to pay more. That doesn't sound great at all. But if we phrase it as, you know, would you be willing to pay X amount if that could guarantee you'd get a spot close to your destination, we'd probably have some different answers, is my estimation on it.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, people are used to demand pricing this day and age, everything from Uber to buying an airline ticket the day before Thanksgiving. You know, you pay more when demand is there, but parking is one of those areas where people just can often feel like they're being fleeced, or that there's just rampant unfairness in the system. And so, yeah, it hasn't gotten a lot of traction in using demand-based pricing in a super nuanced way yet.
It also seems like just like you touched on earlier, a mindset or a mind shift. I think there are a lot of places everywhere that might be used to driving, but over time, as things change, people adapt. I think someone mentioned the Timbers game thing, and I think that's a great example where, you know, maybe 20 years ago, people would drive downtown a lot more, but now people take alternative modes. You know, I think as our transit becomes more robust, as we get more bicycle networks, walkability, sidewalks are added, people will start using those. I think people are just used to driving, but when the alternatives become more viable, that's more favorable and cheaper, much cheaper. So I think it's a mind shift that I think will slowly happen.
I was just reminded of one more thing by my colleague Ann, actually, that came up as a part of the tourism conversation, which is that Visit Vancouver mentioned a van pool that they ran during the large event, right, where they coordinated with the mall to run shuttles and C-Tran to an event downtown, right? So to your point, Jason, folks are starting to get creative with ways to find alternatives to get folks downtown, right? And so that was just another example.
So, yeah, I mean, our kind of conclusion here is thinking that a core and edge geography tied to a progressive tier, time-based approach is a nice blend of two techniques that are very compatible. You know, it can be very clear to the user. It's fairly simple to manage and operate. Seems like a kind of an ideal solution for where Vancouver is at right now and for the next couple years at least. They're flexible. You're constantly going to be looking at your geographies and your exact pricing rates, but they give you a lot of tools in both of those realms.
Yeah, I mean, our customers downtown and just living downtown, hearing a lot of people, they're looking for that edge space. They're like, where can I park for cheaper or for free? Or that's the first question I get for people that are new to like kind of our business. Yeah. So having that option where you're like, oh yeah, you can park right here, but if you just are willing to walk, and most of them are, at least at our business, are like, oh yeah, we'd love to walk. Tell us where that spot is. Make that clear so we know where we can park and walk in for less.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, downtown's well on its way to being a place where people like walking a few blocks. It's not a burden anymore because it's a vibrant, active downtown space. You know, it's a lot more interesting walking by businesses and homes than parking lots.
I mean, just since you said that, that exact scenario happened recently. My fiance and I, we take the bus and we buy primarily, and so we went to Natural Grocers, and we had to go across various parking lots, walking to reach another shop we wanted to go to. Probably the worst experience ever to walk across, 78th Street, parking lots where you're getting almost hit every few seconds. And so to that point, downtown shouldn't be that, in my opinion. It should be somewhere that's pleasurable to walk. And I think parking lots are conducive to the opposite. It's completely unwalkable, heat islands. It's not interesting, it's dangerous. But then you go to the places people go on vacation, whether it's Italy or, Amsterdam or Disneyland. It's, again, the complete opposite. Gardens, parklets, green space. So walkability is a huge thing, and I think as we reduce parking, it de-uglifies downtown and makes it more pleasurable to get around. I think people are more willing to and feel safer and feel better and are to walk. So
right.
It just hit a note, a couple weeks ago walking across those parking lots when you said that. So,
Right.
What was great.
I have a question too, thinking about the free parking, and then looking at the map on there, is there any, are we looking at any like mitigation strategies for keeping people from just parking in-house?
Yeah, we currently enforce there, right? It's a permit zone. You said Hauk?
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. It's a permit zone, right? So, we can enforce. Typically, it's not, because it's not paid, it's not a regular enforcement. It's usually based off complaints. But we are thinking about the integrity of neighborhoods as well, right? We don't want, as to your point, we don't want, spillover for folks to just park in a neighborhood because it's free. So it is a permit zone so that, the folks that live there can park there. And then there's, enforcement as needed if again, there is spillover that is created as a result of that.
Are you thinking about expanding the permit zone? That's what I was, I guess, wondering, because I know there's a bunch of free areas where you can go and used it before, but also had community not be very happy with that.
Yeah. We are looking at the zone in general, right? Evaluating our overall parking enforcement area, and that is a part of it. Is the permit, the 3A zone, as we call it, the Arnada zone, and then the Hauk area as well.
All right. Any other questions on geography or tier-based? 4 more topics to get through here. All right, let's keep going. Thank you for your input on this topic. All right, the next one, I guess, on-street or public weekend pricing. And just looking at your occupancy data, I think we see a pretty strong case, particularly for adding enforcement and payment requirements on Saturdays. The profile is practically the same as Wednesdays, other than some variations in the hot and cold spots. So I think there's a pretty valid case there. And then even enough activity on Saturdays or Sundays to consider it, that might just come down to kind of staffing capacity, for example, or how much you want to kind of break tradition of keeping Sundays free. It's kind of a national tradition, for better or worse. But yeah, that's kind of our consultant professional evaluation of your on-street situation. And Gabe, maybe you can fill us in a little bit more on just where Parking Services is thinking about this right now.
Yeah, we're developing a plan for weekend. It's been on for weekend enforcement. It's been on the radar for some time. Frankly, we hear a lot of push from the businesses, right? I think what we're finding, we currently have officers on the weekends. They're mostly to address prohibited parking. Folks in ADA spaces or fire lanes, and I think that a lot of the businesses that we're hearing from are eager to have that happen, right? Because it does drive demand on street. Folks are there for a long period of time. Do not create turnover, and you know, for lack of better terms, it's a little chaos sometimes down at the waterfront, right? Because folks, you know, can kind of, it's a free-for-all, as we put it. So we're developing plans, we're looking at kind of the scope of it. That's what this question is asking, potentially the hours, potentially the area, and the days of the week, if it's going to be both Saturday and Sunday. But that's where we are, and we've been capturing data as well. That's where some of the data comes from. We've been also doing occupancy counts on Saturday and Sundays as well.
It would seem from a parking management standpoint that, you know, given just how in demand those spots are on the weekend, that having some form of payment, you know, to help do that would make the most sense. I mean, it's sort of absurd right now. You can park from 6 o'clock on Friday to 8 a.m. on Monday down in the street, you know, in the waterfront, which is some of our, you know, most in-demand parking, and you can do that all for $0. And so that doesn't make a lot of sense for just a pure efficiency standpoint.
Yeah, thoughts from anyone else on the committee about this? Or maybe the wheels are pretty much in motion already. Okay. Well, you know, certainly adding or extending pricing, really all of these strategies require, you know, marketing, communication, and outreach efforts, of course. You all, the city, certainly know this, that when a major program or initiative gets underway, it's important to ease community members into it. And I think anytime you're changing, you know, pricing and enforcement practices, it's really good to focus on kind of education and leniency in your enforcement at the outset to help people come up to speed with kind of the new regime. That could include a lot of, you know, $0 citations that just say, warning, you know, try again next time, that kind of thing. So that's something we'll elaborate more on the plan. It's just how communities kind of bring in, you know, new enforcement practices and what the phase-in period looks like. All right. On to kind of the parking management topic here, we want to specifically talk about, you know, the range of parking permits that you have. And you don't have a super like profligate or excessive parking permit you know, system here, certainly compared to a lot of communities I work in. But, you know, I do want to raise the idea, particularly with these general access permits, you know, that you are selling these all-you-can-park buffet passes for $65, $110, $125 a month. And if someone's using it every day, you know, it's significantly cheaper than paying kind of the ticket price of on-street. And so would you want to consider, you know, scaling back some of these monthly parking permits? And I know a lot of them are geared towards employees in particular, you know, who are you know, not necessarily in a must-drive situation, but, you know, access for employees to downtown is a critical concern for the city and the viability of businesses here. But would you want to sort of eliminate or pare back the monthly option and instead look at things like, say, a 20-pack of day use parking permits that could still be offered at a discount if the city feels that's in the city's interests, but just kind of creating a new pricing model for these permits. And just to point out some of these numbers, you know, in 2023, the purple hourly wage permit, we sold 78 of those. So it's not a huge number, but again, those are the low wage permits, the you know, the under $20 an hour employees who have access to that. But then over 1,000 of these street parking permits, that's a significant you know, chunk of users of your downtown parking supply. And when they have that all-you-can-park buffet permit option, it might be inducing, you know, more driving behavior than is ideal and dissuading people from considering other modes of travel.
Gabe, who's eligible for the general street parking permits?
I think anybody, frankly. It's just a on-street permit that you apply for, and you'll get it, essentially, as long as it's available for some time. It was not available. We were sold out with Zoom Info, had a big portion of it, but now with the new garage going, they freed up some permits.
Just designated spots though, right? So you're talking about,
Not the on-street, the regular on-street are, oh, yes, forgive me. Yeah, there are reserved spaces, for permits, yes. Yeah. Mhm.
The way I see permit system is that it can be a really powerful tool to address some of the equity concerns and make sure that we are allowing those who do have socioeconomic barriers to access their work or school or whatever it might be. So in terms of looking at how that goes, I just would look at that through an equity lens to make sure that we're meeting the needs of everybody in Vancouver.
so when you say 20-pack, that means like 20 days a month? Is that what that means? Like they wouldn't park on the, employee, for example, wouldn't need to park on the.
Right, right. I would not put a time limit or an expiration date.
Okay.
Say you sold 20 packs,
Oh,
but then you just buy it, and when the person chooses to drive, they, check off one
okay.
of those.
Okay.
And so it's a way of, potentially still buying discounted parking, Ryan, to kind of meet some of your equity concerns. But then it makes each day of parking activity a deliberate decision as opposed to the buffet. So you could buy a 20-pack and use it over a year or use it over a month.
Okay.
And I would add that with the increased hybrid work, right, where folks are maybe not coming in 5 days a week anymore, it does help to kind of fit the evolving need of the office worker, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, most people I know, it's 3 days a week minimum.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's actually helps parking a lot.
5 days a week in our office, in
Yeah.
our whole entire building, it's 5 days a week. No one does hybrid. So, I mean, it varies, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a way we can focus that into just the edge spaces so that the core spaces are kind of freed up for that, and we're kind of allowing that option, but pushing it to the edge?
Yeah, it's definitely really compatible with that. And that's kind of where your permit curbs are today, are sort of on, you don't have core and edge right now, but the map I sketched out, the permit curbs are kind of in that edge zone primarily. And so you could continue that pattern in the future. And, it's really the assumption, someone using a permit or a 20-pack probably is parking day long. And so you want to direct them to the edge locations primarily.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's a technically sound proposal. It can be a political lift, certainly. All you can park buffet kind of permits are popular for a reason, because they are simple to understand, cheaper to purchase, and actually kind of easier to enforce in many ways. But Gabe, I think you're on board at least. So, we'll see what City Council says about this on August 12th as well. That sounds like you all are at least interested in exploring the potential for it. And if not fully committing to it, at least having it in your toolkit to consider. All right, anything else on this one? And again, we'll kind of dive into exactly what permits this might apply to. There's a lot of different ways of doing the per day purchase. It doesn't have to be a 20-pack. It could be just a discount code for the Parking Kitty app, that employees have or low wage workers have. There's a lot of ways to kind of tackle the nuts and bolts of who can have access to it and what kind of pricing option they get. But the general premise here is removing it from the monthly kind of permit structure. All right. Speaking of the customer and the user, we want to sort of dive into their experience, making parking, usable, intuitive, logical, and fair feeling. also taking advantage of the tools at our disposal to shape behavior, using pricing to shift demand around, for example, thinking about different permit and payment tiers. But kind of initially, we want to look at the wayfinding topic as a means of reducing availability anxiety. We know there's availability downtown, but what we hear a lot from community members is, well, not exactly where I want to park, or that's not my direct experience. And that's very reasonable. People don't want to hunt around and circulate for those available spaces that may be on the periphery. You want to guide people to less congested areas. If you do something like a core and an edge strategy, wayfinding and branding of that system is going to be really important, not just for like on-street signage, but making that clear in the payment apps, making that clear on the city website, and anywhere else that people are learning about your parking system. And then kind of speaking of the website, we have identified a few areas that it needs a little bit of cleanup and updating to bring the most accurate information to the user today. And then certainly if you bring new strategies in and new pricing in, you'll want to make sure that the website is one platform that you update. Yeah, I mean, do you all have, well, let me kind of point to, I guess, one other thing here. On the wayfinding front, it's also not just about wayfinding to parking, but downtown-wide wayfinding. If you're really looking at park once, of having people park, on the edge or a few blocks from their destination, then that pedestrian wayfinding becomes really important as well. And I think you have really good systems in place, for kind of downtown wayfinding. I think probably the first time I drove in here for this project, came in, saw the Park and Go garage, pulled into the garage, and then also saw this, guidance sign, Esther Short Park and the Convention Center. So it's just kind of indicative that, you need to address wayfinding for every step or every mile of the journey. And kind of back to that final point, Jason, as you mentioned, like wayfinding is also an urban design strategy. How do people interpret building heights and parks and streetscape to kind of understand where activity centers and areas of high intensity are? Things like Main Street Promise, that's going to be a prominent feature. The waterfront, that's the first thing you kind of see if you're driving across the I-5 bridge. So wayfinding is kind of a big arrival sequence. So I kind of welcome your thoughts on wayfinding deficiencies that may exist or potential. And if you have ideas about static signage wayfinding, or looking at things that are more sophisticated like real-time occupancy sensors and guidance sensors, like this photo from my hometown of Bend, where they just launched this system a few months ago. Do you see an interest and a need and a potential for this in downtown?
I do, for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think this is super helpful.
Yeah.
The more you can say, like the Park and Go, that there's 50 stalls left, you're not, circling in there and really you can't park there.
Sorry, Jocelyn, would you mind turning on your microphone just so folks online can hear you?
Anyway, I was just saying that the wayfinding is a great idea. I think we definitely need to add more of that down here. It helps people, direct people of where they can actually go and park instead of just circling endlessly. I think it's very smart.
Yeah, that's certainly our use case would be coming down for events or things like that. And like, instead of driving around trying to find something somewhere else, you just saw a number and you knew that you could go pull in and get to a spot. That certainly would be a lot more preferable than driving around. And I'd be willing to do that versus even, trying to get as close as possible, just knowing that you have an area to go into. Yeah.
Yeah, this sign that you have up now on the screen from Bend, I think is super smart too, because if you get familiar with the different areas, you can be like, oh, I'm gonna go over here and park, box over here because that's more convenient, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah, the different users are really important through this. Like, I know the parking system in downtown Bend. I know where the locations are, but this sign helps me figure out availability, you know, versus a tourist to Vancouver or Bend who may be looking for parking for the very first time. You're kind of coming off a highway and you're just trying to figure out where the heck is downtown? How do I get off Highway 14? What, you know, what's going on here? So that it's kind of that whole sequence that you want to work through, you know, from the very kind of primal, instinctual down to really granular. Do others of you have thoughts about, you know, something kind of sophisticated like this versus, you know, blunter tools and, you know, maybe use like kind of user experiences that you think could be improved through this?
Well, I think,
go ahead, Gary.
one other thing too, like having this kind of defined signage to know where the public parking is, I know kind of eases the stress of also, you know, we may have other private lots available where people could pay and park in. You also never really kind of know what the price is going to be when you go in there. You know that this is all defined and that it's all, even if it just makes you feel better about like knowing where you're going, that you're going to be, you know what you're expected to kind of pay too as well. I know like going to Portland, right, or whatever, that's a huge thing. Is, you know, some garages may be cheap, some maybe like $10 more, but you have no idea, right? And you're just kind of stuck once you get in there. So I think that just eases that sort of stress as well.
I like the idea. I'm confused about logistics though. Where do you put a sign? There's a lot of ways into downtown.
Yeah.
And how much do they cost?
Yeah, I mean, going full bore on something like this, that's another study altogether. But, you know, we want to know for purposes of this plan, do you support the city at least exploring low to high end kind of wayfinding improvements?
And even having it outside of a garage, right?
outside of garage.
And then, if you see there's zero, but then you've got a sign that says, well, there's parking this way and then more parking this way, and it kind of feeds you around. That's still a better experience.
I know. Anne in particular, and I've been talking a lot about, if you go to that core and edge strategy, how do you use wayfinding to make it apparent? Hey, there's a pricier option down here. There's a lower cost day-long option out here. There's not a huge number of examples of doing that with on-street signage. We're kind of building that airplane as we go, thinking about, you know, how do you direct people and inform them about the different parking options and pricing options, you know, that would exist in a downtown.
One note on that, I see like wayfinding to core premium and edge economy. Even the verbiage of wayfinding signs could induce demand in certain areas. And so it might be beneficial to create a nicer verbiage for getting people to park in the edge versus the core. Here it says core premium, but that might encourage people, ooh, premium parking. But we don't want people really to park or to drive in the core area of downtown. So it might make more sense to have the premium parking be the less expensive parking that you find at the edge, and the core be the pricey or high cost parking. And so would divert more people to the edge where there's a higher abundance of parking at a lower rate versus the core of downtown.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point about vernacular there. I think premium and economy is probably stolen from airport parking. Right. They do more wayfinding at airports than anywhere else in the world.
And I would just say, you know, when we look at things like the Vancouver Mall, right? Huge parking lot. If you're parking on the outer reaches of that, you're walking what's the equivalent of blocks and blocks of distance, but there's not that same anxiety sort of associated with it because you can see this large sea of parking, right? And so if we can address the anxiety through better wayfinding, I think it's not necessarily the distance that's the impetus for a lot of people. It's the anxiety around finding availability.
Yeah, I think even for me, like, okay, I'm gonna go to the city website. That has to be really clear about where I can park when, and then being like, this isn't clear. I don't know where I can go. Having that be really clear for a lot of people that are like, all right, I'm going to Vancouver. Where do I park? You know, if it's very obvious when they get to that, oh, this. It's not a list of all these different potential things, but very first thing is like, where can I actually park?
Right, right.
And also an aggregation of other sources of ways to get to, as you were saying.
Yeah,
before, you
absolutely.
talk about the ride share or something, right? But a way for people to kind of have a one-stop area where they can see the alternative methods for getting down there. I mean, it's related to parking, right? Is knowing when and how to take the bus, how to get this ride share, how to whatever, bike, but seeing all of that available in one spot as well would be helpful.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in this industry where we think we're kind of in the last throes of manual wayfinding until cars just start wayfinding themselves, self-driving cars and super networked cars that know the occupancy, they know where the free spaces are. We're thinking about that through this plan, but we know it's still a long ways off in that scenario. And downtown's just in this transition period in terms of a lot of different things, land uses, and really committing to new mobility systems, and the reality that some of these parking programs are going to cause some growing pains, and so really need an emphasis on bringing the user along and your customers and your constituents to kind of adapt to this changing environment that might be more dynamic than they're used to today.
Is there
Okay.
a way to get, sorry, I guess since we don't have the meters anymore, obviously, and it's all through the booths and Parking Kitty, any hotspot for knowing what the availability is in certain areas and things like that?
Yeah, again, going back to kind of the tools, right? We're working on potentially purchasing a what is called an LPR vehicle, and that license plate recognition vehicle where we will be able to capture data in real time far more regularly, right? Right now we're dealing with kind of old school methods where we're keeping tallies of how many cars, but we are going to kind of be able to capture that data and then look at the data in terms of just more details, right? What type of cars are there? How often are they coming? Do they have a permit? X, Y, and Z. So we are working there. It just takes some time to be able to gather these tools and implement them.
All right. Well, so we'll keep kind of diving into this, and I think we're not necessarily making absolute decisions about wayfinding through this plan, but we'll array a number of options, low cost, quick to kind of higher capital, longer term investments for the city to consider in the future. And really, so many of these strategies are conditional, kind of trigger based. As circumstances change, now this tool becomes really applicable. So, kind of a big picture statement about what this plan will include. Okay, 2 or 3 minutes to go here. I just want to get to the last core topic, which is about shared parking. There's a lot of ways shared parking can manifest. One way the city allows it today is private to private sharing, where a development project looks to some other location to fulfill some of its parking requirements in the code. We're not going to dive too much into that, with you all. We will later today with the CCRA in a different meeting. But the one that's really applicable to the PAC here is, does the city want to go out and pursue sharing agreements where the city secures access to privately built parking assets out there today? And kind of one example of this might be, well, for one, this could be a long-term, kind of year-round thing. It could be a private parking lot that's just really regularly empty or very lightly used. And the city could think about, leasing that and basically operating it as a public parking lot. Another way to do it would be to do the sharing just during these surge events. There's a lot of private off-street parking that's empty on Saturday during the farmers market, for example. And so, here's one. This is a block away from the farmers market a couple weeks ago. and they are very explicitly, no farmers market parking. Could this be an opportunity, for example? I don't know who this owner is. We're not necessarily saying this parking lot, but just as an example. And then just an idea to float out there is looking at the Zoom Info project in the waterfront. 1,200 parking spaces are soon to come online here. We presume that at least some of those are going to be empty during the week, and probably many will be empty on weekends. It's a pretty prime location for waterfront access, proximity to downtown, this building, the farmers market. Is this the kind of sort of big fish parking opportunity that the city might want to pursue a sharing agreement with? Maybe just starting on Saturdays and Sundays or Friday evenings. So that's about as baked as the idea is right now. Just kind of are interested in your first impressions on, is this something the city should be getting into, to bring, I guess, more efficiency and utilization to parking that exists today? And if yes, how would you dive into creating those agreements?
That seems like a no-brainer to me for the weekends. You've got these businesses that don't have employees on the weekend, why not make it available to the public? And, I mean, I don't know how you do it. Cut off
Yeah,
part of
that's
the
the hard
parking
part.
lot, but meter that part, and say when they come in and share the revenue with the owner, I don't, you guys have probably thought about it more than that. but-
It's a lot of ways to draw up the contract, definitely, but.
Just curious, so does the city allow parking for events in the weekend in their lot over here?
Let's say another one.
The big lot 3.
Yeah, right here. Is that available for Saudi Market and the surge parking?
Correct, yeah. It's exclusively for the farmers market is who we have an agreement with, but that lot will soon go offline.
No,
Yeah.
I understand that. I
Yeah.
was just curious if it came down here for farmers market, 'cause I
Yeah.
park right here.
I think it's a good idea. I think it would make sense more in garages. One, probably more infrastructure there to do, pricing and wayfinding, like those signs that you had from Ben as an example. So probably easier to find for people, and so that these lots don't change over time either. So it makes more sense. But also from a land use principle, it'd be nice to discourage open air surface lots and to get those developed into something instead, and not to make contracts and sort of, I guess, appease people who are making money off of open surface lots. So I think it's great, if we target garages or more efficient locations for wayfinding and that technology, and parking makes more sense.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, you're right that the newer locations and garages in particular, they already have gates and access control systems, and so it would make it easier to manage access and collect payment, versus you go to the farmer's market today, it's a volunteer collecting $3, it's lot 3, and they make it work, but that's, probably not a sustainable kind of solution if parking services were the operator. Yeah. So again, this sharing idea, this is one location kind of opportunistically sitting out there. The cranes are still in place. We've made no connections or entrees to this owner necessarily, but it's just one way of thinking about, hey, there's some big assets out there, that you might be able to tap into. And 1,200 spaces with a single owner, that's biting off a lot in one swing. It could easily happen with a 10-space lot too. It's very scalable.
And I do apologize, we're a few minutes over, so I do want to get to the next topic, which is the vote, right, for our chair and our vice chair. And so I apologize for cutting you off here, so we can keep it moving, and I want to be respectful of your time, so.
But thank you very much, Ben, for.
Thank you, everyone.
All this
That's a very good
information. It's
conversation.
Great information, very thorough. So moving along to the election of officers, we are going to elect a chair and a vice chair today for this committee. We'll start with the chair. Does anybody have any nominations for the chair?
Does anybody want to be chair?
Yeah.
I will gladly continue to be chair.
I nominate Ryan for chair.
Excellent.
I second.
Thanks, Kurt. Are there, anybody else that's going to be nominated today?
I'd like to be nominated for vice chair, please.
Righty, excellent.
I'll nominate Jason.
Right. Okay. And any other nominations for vice chair today? All righty,
Get a second for the vice chair.
I'll second.
excellent.
Thank you.
And so we can just go to a vote of aye or no, correct? Since we only have one person running for both positions. Is that correct, Tina?
I'm not sure.
Yes,
50,
we'll just go ahead with
Let's
that.
do that. Excellent. So for chair, all those in favor of voting for Ryan Moore for chair, say aye.
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 And all those against say nay. Excellent, the ayes have it, and Ryan Moore has been elected the chair of the Parking Advisory Committee. I thank you very much for this opportunity, so I appreciate everyone voting today. Next, we have the vice chair. We have Jason Cromer, who is the only nominee. All those in favor of Jason Cromer being elected the vice chair say aye,
Aye.
and all those opposed nay. The ayes have it, and Jason Cromer has been elected the vice chair. Congratulations, Jason.
Thank you.
All righty. And that is the end of our agenda today. Thanks everybody for staying a few moments late and all the contributions. Obviously, a lot of information today. Hopefully, everybody can enjoy the weather before it gets too hot again.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thanks, I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
See you guys in real life.
Yeah, good to see you, Kurt.
How do you like
Yeah, no,